Seashells Afternoon is a 30 by 24 inch walnut oil painting that Terrill Welch is going to take you through the process of its development. Hello, I'm Terrill Welch, and today I'm going to take us through the process from reference gathering to the finished painting for Seashells in the Afternoon. I'm going to do that by using screen share and see if we can't investigate and dig down just a little deeper into what happens in that process, which is something that I'm unable to do when I'm actually painting. So I'm going to use the images that I have taken and go back through it and see what we can discover. We are going to begin at the beginning with the references, starting on Sunday, January 26th. And as we go through these, because these were done in preparation for the painting, Seashells in the Afternoon, I want you to remember that the eventual painting ends up being a fictitious composition based on the experiences of being on the shore and gathering this information. So visually, it's not an accurate depiction of a photograph. Rather, it's the full gathering of my full body sensory experience. In order to get these images, I need to get very low to the ground and compose them looking outwards rather than looking down. So I'm calling these landscapes of the small, or landscapes with the small. So the shells are the main subject in the foreground, settled right into the landscape. I do them landscape as well as portrait, so I've got lots of compositions to consider and to just have a good feel for things. Sometimes I notice something when I'm looking down and I gather it because I'm just enticed by how everything is composed together in a random kind of way. One of the things about taking images of seashells is that some of them have just expired. So part of what you see is still the clam inside of the clam shell. And this is on the Monday morning, January 27th, and it was so cold that there was frost on the logs on the shore. Still, when I got down low and took the images of the sun coming through the clamshell, there was a warmth that I just was totally taken with. And the clouds you can see in the background are actually the reflection on the still sea. The water moves in and out slowly, and there's bits of shell and bone and all sorts of debris that comes into and settles into the bottom of the shells. The light, it can be just magic. And then the strong shapes of the sandstone in the background. It has an abstract quality to it that is a delicious tension between that and the figurative detail of this clamshell in the foreground and the little stones and bits of rock. there's a distortion in the water when you look through that is different from the actual shape if you were to reach in and feel it. So it has that kind of mystery or delusion about it. The shells go way out into the rocks, and the clouds on top. You want to be a little crab and crawl in there, poke around, lift up a shell, move a stone. I don't see many crabs this time of year, though. I think they've gone into deeper water where the temperature is more consistent than on the surface. The shells get buried into the rocks and filled up with barnacles and pieces of broken shell. So that's the end of my time on the beach. And then on the Thursday at 5 a.m. in the morning, we had a drawing class. And I chose to draw one of the shells from my references as part of a study that I wanted to do for the painting. And it was interesting just taking the time to draw the lines and kind of swoop them around. I love these shapes. They give me such a sense of inner peace and well-being. So at this point, I'm ready to start to paint. I have a yellow ground in acrylic on my canvas, and I'm using a small brush to make a few lines to put in my composition. And I'd like you to remember that this is a fictitious composition in the sense that I'm composing it from various elements based on the references that I had gathered. But there's no one reference. There's several references. And there's my whole experience over the 2 days, from one afternoon to the following morning. And I bring those with me, along with several years of experience, let's say many years of experience, in having this conversation between nature and myself and translating it onto my canvas. And I think of painting as a conversation, as my favorite way of communicating with nature and with myself, and then with the viewer. And the idea is to be able to get at the essence of my subject. So I continue painting, starting in the right corner. And the reason that I do that is because I'm left-handed. And so it keeps the paint out of my way as I'm working, because I will work this whole composition up wet into wet, meaning that all the paint that on there is wet. None of it has dried, so it easily moves around. But not particularly too easy on this morning, because it was only 62 degrees Fahrenheit in my studio. However, I keep working and painting with a big 1-inch brush, getting the shapes into place, just feeling the energy of those shells. And I start putting in a bit of the blue of the sea. I'm not fussed too much about how the paint goes on. I want that energy, and that means getting it on with as much memory and emotion as possible from actually being there. So I keep working, and stepping back and working and stepping back until I have the whole canvas covered with that first layer of paint. And my composition is blocked in. And at this point you can see most of it is covered. I take a moment and make a cup of tea and look at it, see how it feels. I have some angles that I'm not very happy with that I will work on and see if I can show you here. So this one here. And this one here isn't working for me. So you'll see those be adjusted. Later on, you can keep a notice of this spot because I will come back to it. It gives me a bit of trouble. We'll see that later on. It snowed outside. It had been snowing off and on during the day. The studio didn't warm up much. I think it got up to 64 degrees Fahrenheit. So my paint remained relatively stiff throughout the day of working with it. But you can see that it's starting to build up. And you can see the brush marks that have been left behind when we look at it from this angle. So I keep working on it. So this is the second day that I was working on that painting. And I've started to adjust some of the areas, but they're still not very settled. It's not really holding together. I'm still just adding paint, standing back, having a look. More and more shapes start to form. And I haven't switched to a smaller brush yet. I'm still using my big 1-inch brushes on this 30 by 24-inch canvas. Now you can see it's starting to come together. And I have begun to work with a 1/2-inch brush. And at this point that I know it's not done, I call it good for now, just for the day. And this is for me, because it helps me, and I'm going to again show you with my marker. It shows me things that I can't see when I'm looking at it in color. So I can see that these values right here are too bright. And I can see how much this shape isn't working very well. And then there's these two similar sized rocks. One of them has to go. I'm going to have to decide. So compositionally, I'm still making corrections as I work through the painting, because the beginning of the painting was just my best guess around how it was going to work. As you saw, I only used a few lines to put it in place in reference to what I had documented in my own mind about what I was going to do. And it's really interesting because this angle is very intimate and personal when you have something like this in the foreground. So you're not looking at it as from a distance as an observer, but closely as if you're another clamshell with your two halves poking maybe in a slightly different direction along the beach. So this is Friday at about 11ish, and I go back to the beach to just refresh my full sensory memory of what it's like to be there. And these clamshells that had expired had been left by the tide on top of the sandstone reef. And I just really enjoyed their shapes. We've had high winter tides, so it's washed the shells way up along the beach, almost close to where it's eroding underneath the trees. I love all the bits and pieces poking through, how it's untidy and messy, and yet there's things that hold your attention, like where the barnacles have worn off of the mussel shells. I actually took this small handful of shells with me from the beach, which is something I rarely ever do, and something I don't do lightly because the shells are so important to the health of the shoreline. But I want to do a drawing exercise using these, and then when I'm done, I will take them back and put them again where I found them. Let's have a look at this painting again. You can see that I've signed it, and I've done more work on it. Let's see if I can show you. So up here, I added in the reflection on that one tree. I've taken and toned down all of those highlights, and this one here as well. You can see I have my name in there. And I've reworked this area. Not to my satisfaction yet. It's very wet and getting really hard to work on. I've strengthened some of the highlights in here. And I took out one of the rocks. Darkened this one instead. I've also worked this area to kind of get it more depth, more rounded. I continue to work this area. I'm still not happy with it, particularly this highlight right here. So I had to think about it for a bit. And here you can see that it's been reworked. And these are details of the resting painting. You can see how much paint is on there, and the texture overall, the directional brush strokes. These details are as interesting as the overall painting. They're like little paintings within a big painting. When I was doing this sunlight coming through the clamshells. It reminded me of years ago when I was about 16 and I was painting a castle. And we had the same colors in it, these really rich yellows and yellow ochre. This one really shows the use of directional brush strokes. And if I go in closer, you can see there's really not much for detail. It's not like painting as if you're sketching, but rather painting as if you're using paint, which is what I do. And there it is, still on the easel. And by itself, it's still wet, so it's still got some shiny spots to it, but it's complete. And here it is in a room view, so you can get a feel for it at just a little bit of distance without the clutter of the studio when it's sort of removed from its in situ creative place. And that is it, my friends. That is the process for creating this painting. And I thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen as we discover what we can discover within the process. So thank you very much.